Our third speaker is Dr. Chris Kaczor, and he is professor of philosophy at Loyola Marymount University and corresponding member of the Pontifical Academy for Life at the Holy See in Rome and the James Madison Society of Princeton University. Dr. Kaczor earned his doctorate from the University of Notre Dame. He has many books, at least 14, my last count, and the most recent one is Abortion Rights For and Against, which was co-authored with Kate Grizzly. So please welcome me. Let's welcome Dr. Kaczor.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I was so delighted to get the letter of invitation, and then even more delighted when I saw the distinguished speakers. There are real heroes here, people that I've admired for over 25 years. Helen Alvare, I remember, came to give a talk at Boston College when I was an undergraduate, and I was so impressed and inspired by how she interacted. And Janet Smith also was here, who gave a great talk when I was an undergraduate. And those women in particular I've looked up to for a long time, so to be on the same program with them is a huge honor for me. I received another email about 2 years ago from the Vatican, and it was inviting me to join the Pontifical Academy for Life. And I was delighted by that. And in the email it said there'll be an audience with the Holy Father. And I thought, wow, that's great. So as you probably know, sometimes an audience with the Holy Father means, the Pope's up there and you're with 500 people. But I was told, no, this is a personal audience. You actually get to shake the Pope's hand. It's like, well, great. So right away I started thinking, well, what am I going to say to the Pope? Right? I've only got, 15, 20 seconds. I want to say something meaningful, right? Something that's really going to make an impression. So I thought, what am I going to say? And I thought about it for a long time, and I thought, okay, what I'll say is, Holy Father, would you pray for my family in my university? And I thought, well, maybe he'll ask me about my family or my university. I can kind of have a little conversation. So I thought that'll be great. And then I thought, okay, well, I heard he doesn't speak English that well, and I don't speak Spanish or Italian, unfortunately. So I thought, well, what language will I use? Well, he lived in Germany for 2 years, and I've lived in Germany for 2 years. So I'll speak in German to him. So we're in this line and going up there, and the person right ahead of me goes up there, shakes the Holy Father's hand, has this little conversation, and then he moves out of the way. It's my big moment. So I walk up to him, stick out my hand, and say in English, "Nice to meet you." So that didn't work out exactly as I hoped, but well, today what I want to do is I want to look at a passage that is in the Second Vatican Council, in Gaudium et Spes. And the passage says this: marriage and conjugal love are by their nature ordained to the begetting and educating of children. Children really are the supreme gift of marriage and contribute very substantially to the welfare of their parents. And this passage is also found in Humanae Vitae. But in neither place does the Church offer a kind of justification or rationale for this. I think it's sort of so obvious in a way from both the Jewish and the Christian perspective that this is true, that it's not, they don't really give a justification. But in our culture, I think this claim really isn't that obvious. Imagine you lived in a culture in which people didn't value private property. Well, it would be pretty hard to explain why the Church teaches that stealing is wrong, right, in that kind of culture. Or imagine a culture in which truthfulness wasn't really valued. It would be pretty hard to explain why lying was wrong in that kind of culture. So in our culture, I don't think there's a great premium and value put on the procreation and education of children. So what I want to do today is talk about three things. I want to talk about why the procreation and education of children is valuable in terms of, first, erotic love; secondly, in terms of marital friendship; and thirdly, in terms of eternal salvation. So let me start off with erotic love. Erotic love, being in love, you might say, is defined and thought of by different people in different ways. But what I want to do is draw on the teaching of Plato. Plato has a famous work called the Symposium, and in the Symposium there's a very famous story about how erotic love came into existence. So what the Platonic Aristophanes says is this: in the beginning, human beings were very different than they are today. In the beginning, human beings were akin to conjoined twins joined back to back. And they didn't have just 2 arms, they had 4 arms, and not just 2 legs, but 4 legs, and not just 1 face, but 2 faces. And they rolled around, and they were extremely powerful. And these extremely powerful kind of circle people rebelled against the gods. They were so strong, they wanted to take over the heavens. And so they rebelled against the gods, and what happened is Zeus got really angry, and he got his thunderbolts out, and he threw down the thunderbolts, and he split these circle people in half. And after he split them in half, what happened was he warned them. He said, you keep rebelling against me, and I'll split you in half again. You'll be hopping around on 1 foot. So you don't watch out. Don't do it. So human beings, in this way, came to have their current configuration, right? Just 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 face, etc. But what happened as a result was that people missed their other half. They missed the one that they were formerly united with. And so Plato said, this is how erotic love came into existence. And even today, isn't it true that people speak of their spouse often as their better half, right? Even today, we have this idea of, you complete me, right, says Jerry Maguire, right? Right? And the idea, right, is that when we're in love, we feel that this person does complete us. This person is our other half. So erotic love is this drive to be as unified as you can with the one that you love. And that's why people that are deeply in love desire to be married, right? They want to be as fully united as they can be with the one that they love. And you notice all love songs, right? Love songs say things like, I'll love you forever, as long as there's, sand on the beach, as long as the stars are in the heavens, I'm going to love you that long, right? There's no love song that says, well, I'll love you till next Thursday, right? And then we'll reevaluate. So love songs are about the air of eternity, right? And love songs are also very particularized, right? There's no love song about, you're my type or something. No, it's it's about this person in particular, right? It's very focused, it's very personal, it's very individual. And so people that are in love get married, and they get married to this one individual, and they get married for better or for worse, right? With that note of eternity. And so how is erotic love related to procreation? Well, having children and raising them is a way of realizing the dream of erotic love, to be fully united with your spouse in a way that's both permanent and exclusive. Each one of us is a walking monument, you might say, to the unity that existed, at least at one time, between our mother and our father. And for almost all couples, the unity is not merely biological, not merely a matter of DNA. For almost all couples, the unity extends to a unity of affection for the child. This remains true even in cases of divorce. So my wife's parents were divorced. They divorced over 40 years, and they disagreed about all kinds of things. But for all that time, they were still united in loving my wife, right? So children unite the couple in emotional life, you might say. And they unite a couple also, typically at least, in having goodwill for that child. So erotic love is a way of realizing the goal of, or having children is a way of realizing the goal of erotic love. There's an interesting book called The Evolution of Desire, and in this book, the author, David Buss, looks at divorce rates around the world. And he found a very interesting correlation between the number of children a couple has and their likelihood of divorce. He found that worldwide, couples that have no children at all have a 39% likelihood of divorce. With one child, the likelihood of divorce drops to 26%. With 2 children, it drops to 19%. And if a couple has 4 or more children, they have less than a 3% likelihood of divorcing. And this also points to the connection between children and erotic love. After all, what's the opposite of erotic love? Well, it's getting divorced, right? You don't want to be united with them completely anymore at all. So children, and Aristotle saw this, are like a glue that help the husband and wife stay together, help them to work through things. So children help to realize this ideal of erotic love, this fusing together of those who are in love. Secondly, children and the raising of them help couples to have a marital friendship. So what do we mean by friendship? Well, perhaps the most interesting and influential account ever written about friendship was Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics. And in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle says that friends have some characteristics in common with each other. One of the things they have is mutual goodwill. right? You're not really a friend with someone if I have goodwill for you, but you don't have goodwill back for me. We're not really friends. If we're going to be friends, I have to have goodwill for you, and you have to have goodwill back for me. Secondly, Aristotle said friends have shared activity together, right? And this is sort of obvious. I mean, you can imagine cases where you have goodwill for someone and they have goodwill back for you. You know, you donate money to the poor in some country far away and they send back a nice thank you note and say they're praying for you. So there's mutual goodwill, but you wouldn't say you're really friends with those people. To be friends, you need shared activity of some kind. And thirdly, Aristotle said, real friends have a shared emotional life. So if something wonderful happens to your friend, you're delighted with them. If something terrible happens to your friend, you're sad with them. So those characteristics are necessary for friendship. Now think about how children enhance the friendship that hopefully exists between husband and wife, right? First of all, you have mutual goodwill. Having a child gives you an extra reason to have goodwill for your spouse. My wife Jennifer is not just my wife, she's also the mother of our children. And this is very important because oftentimes husbands and wives disagree and they fight and they have problems. This is an inevitable part of all human relationships. But when you have a child together, you have an extra motivation for making it work. Because if the relationship between husband and wife crumbles and has trouble, that affects not just the two of you, it affects your kids. Secondly, Aristotle talked about shared activity as part of friendship. Well, if you have children together with your spouse, you have built-in shared activity for the rest of your life, right? Shared activity of taking care of the little baby and will you get the diapers and change this and et cetera, right? Shared activity of making sure toddlers don't die, right? That's a big activity, right? Shared activity of fighting together against your teenagers, right? Shared activity all the way through, right? All the way through life. As long as you're both alive, as long as your kids are alive, you have that built-in shared activity. And then what about shared emotional life? Well, again, if you have children together with your spouse, you've got that shared built-in emotional life together. So sometimes things are going to go great for your kids, right? I have a son who is a great high school football player, and we used to go to the football games and cheer, and we were delighted. It was great. And then one football game, my son caught this punt and was running it back, and he got absolutely slammed, fell to the ground, didn't get up. And obviously, we were completely horrified. So we went to the hospital with him. It turned out he was okay. But together, we were horrified and scared, right? So when you have kids together, you've got the highs and the lows, but you're going through it together, right? You've got that unity together, which is a huge part of having a good marriage. Aristotle famously talked about 3 different kinds of friendship. He said there are friendships of pleasure, friendships of utility, and friendships of virtue. And a friendship of pleasure for Aristotle is basically a kind of fun time friendship, right? It's like the frat buddies or something. They're going out and having drinks and just having fun, basically. And then friendship of utility for Aristotle means basically it's a little bit like a business arrangement, right? So, you've got a car and, you drive me around town and, I've got a credit card, so I let you get the gas for the car, and it's kind of a business arrangement like that. But Aristotle thought the best kind of friendship by far was a friendship of virtue. Because in a friendship of virtue, it's really the person that you care about. It's not the pleasure they're giving you, it's not the utility they're giving you, it's the person. It's their character, it's their goodness that really connects you. And Aristotle said famously that a friendship of virtue has all the good characteristics of both a friendship of pleasure and a friendship of utility. Right? And think about it. If you had a virtuous friend, that person's going to be very useful. If they promise they'll take you to the airport, right? They're going to show up and they're going to take you to the airport. They're going to be very useful. And Aristotle thought one of the virtues was affability, and that's basically not being a stick in the mud, right? So you're going to be fun to be with, right? You're not going to be a clown either. You're the mean, you're affable and friendly. So that's going to be great. Now, what do children do for these kinds of friendships? Well, I don't think children do much at all for a marital friendship of pleasure, right? Not going to enhance your pleasure too much. Not going to do too much either for a marital friendship of utility, right? Children are pretty expensive and they can get in the way of climbing up the power structure. You're not going to have as much time or money probably to come out number one. But if we turn to a friendship of virtue, think how much children benefit the couple in terms of a friendship of virtue. Aristotle thought you got virtues through repeatedly doing good, virtuous activity, right? That's how you get a virtue. If you want the virtue of patience, you have to practice over and over and over again being patient. And isn't that something that all good married couples with kids do all the time? Each stage of life requires a certain patience, right? Little babies do, toddlers do, trust me, teenagers do. Huge amounts of patience are needed all the way through life. Think about the virtue of generosity, right? Children help you to gain that. You repeatedly do actions, even though you don't feel like it, you repeatedly do the good actions. But arguably, I think that children benefit the couple most in terms of humility, right? In terms of humility. So I can tell you lots of stories how my kids have humbled me. But I'll just tell you one, because we don't have that much time today. The one story I'll tell you is when I brought two of my kids, my Jesuit friend who was a professor with me at LMU, invited me up to the Jesuit community with all the priests there for lunch. And so I brought a couple of my sons. They were like 4 and 2 at the time. So I have a big lecture. I say, all right, boys, this is, the priests are there. I want you to have very good manners. I want you to say please and thank you. I want you to use the napkin, everything. I give them this big lecture, and that, yes, Dad, of course I will, no problem. So anyway, lunch was going great, right? They were using napkin and saying please and thank you. Everything's going great. And then my little son, George, he just was getting potty trained. He's about 2. He says, Daddy, I have to go to the bathroom. I said, okay, great. So I grab his little hand, and the bathroom was way at the back. So I grab he was a little kid, so he just grabbed my finger. So I grab his finger, and I'm walking along, and I'm walking through the tables and stuff, and I'm walking in and out, and we get way to the back where the bathroom is. And we get to the back, and George says, I don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. Okay, so I'm going to turn back. And as I'm walking through all the tables, I look down, and there are all these little brown marbles all the way through. Yes, unbelievable. Talk about humiliating. You do not want that to happen. Now, luckily, I had tenure already, so luckily, luckily I didn't get fired for it. But talk to any parent, and they will tell you when kids do this. They really bring you low. They really humiliate you. But let me talk about the last. I have other stories for you if you want to. Now, look up my wife. Google my wife's name, Jennifer Kaczor. She's got all kinds of stories online that'll keep you in stitches. Anyway, but let me turn to the last part, and that's eternal salvation, right? How do the procreation and education of children, help parents with eternal salvation? Well, Jesus was asked famously by the rich young man, what do I have to do to be saved? And I'm sure you all know his answer. Jesus said, obey the commandments. And I think that having kids actually does help the parents obey the commandments, right? So think about the 4th commandment, honor your father and mother. Now, when I was a young unmarried guy, I was very critical of my parents. And I thought back on how they raised me, and I thought, oh, they did this wrong, and they did that wrong, and I could do this better, and this and that. And I had this sort of haughty attitude looking down on them. And then when I had my own kids, I realized how incredibly challenging being a parent is. It's hard to be a good father, even if you're trying. It's hard to be a good mother, even if you're trying. And so only when I had my own kids did I really see and appreciate how much my parents gave to me. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to my parents now. I'm incredibly grateful to them because I see firsthand all the way through, babies, toddlers, teenagers. This is a lot of heartache and headaches and troubles. And it made it much easier for me to honor and love my own parents. The very first commandment that Jesus, of the 10 Commandments, is what? To honor the Lord your God. Have no gods before me. And I think when you have children, it helps you to obey this commandment also. Now, why do I say that? Well, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously said that the human person is the desire to be God. He thought this was typical of human beings, that they desired to be God. Think about the sin of Adam and Eve, right? They were eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, what does that mean? Well, the knowledge of good and evil, right, would be like knowledge from east to west, right? Knowledge from alpha to zeta, from A to Z. In other words, knowledge of good and evil, the idea is this is complete, perfect, total knowledge, right? And again, it's easy to sort of feel, even if you don't really think it, that you're a kind of little God when you're young and childless and healthy and all that, right? When you're little, you know you're not God. It's very clear, right? Somebody else tells you when to get out of bed, what you're going to wear, where you're going to have for breakfast. Everything in your life's planned out by your parents. But when you get to be, 20, whatever, and you don't have any kids, it's easy to feel like you're totally in charge, right? You decide when you get up, you decide what you're going to have for breakfast, you decide what you're going to do, you decide pretty much everything. But having kids, for me at least, shattered the illusion of this perfect control, right? You don't decide all those things, right? You don't decide whether your child's going to be healthy or not healthy. You can't decide half the time to have a child if you want one. You can't decide whether you're going to have a boy or a girl. And even if you did decide, say, to adopt, and you say, I'm going to adopt a girl and a healthy girl, and you choose all that, still, you really don't have much control. Whenever you have kids, you're vulnerable in your children, right? So I enjoy being a professor. It's a great life. But one of my kids has learning disabilities, right? And I can't change that. I can't fix that for her. I can help her study, but even though we study sometimes for tests a lot, she sometimes still fails them, right? And that hurts me. And I think my experience isn't unique. In other words, I think almost all parents experience a deep vulnerability and a deep lack of control when they have kids. You certainly can't make your kids do everything you want your kids to do, especially when they get older, right? There's freedom, and they may misuse their freedom at times. And that also is something that reminds us of our lack of being God. Perhaps the most important way, though, that having kids helps us to obey the commandments is in terms of what Jesus said about salvation in Matthew chapter 25. So in the 25th chapter of Matthew, Jesus says, in the final day, the last judgment, Jesus is going to look out on us and is going to separate those going to heaven and those going to hell. And to those going to heaven, right, he's going to say, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Come into the kingdom. And then to those on the other side, he's going to say, I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was naked and you did not clothe me. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. I remember hearing this passage as a child. I was maybe 10 or so. I looked around the church and I thought, oh my gosh, everyone here is going to go to hell. I mean, who does this, right? I mean, Mother Teresa and her sisters, okay, great, they're in heaven. Everybody else is just, it's hopeless, right? No, who does this? But after I had kids, I realized, all good fathers and all good mothers literally do all those things, right? The child's hungry, and they give that child something to eat. The child's thirsty, and they give that child something to drink. The child's naked, and they clothe that child. And every child comes into the family as a stranger, but good parents welcome that child into the family. So maybe on the last day, the good Lord will look out at many of us. And because we try to be good fathers and good mothers, on that basis, He will say, come into my kingdom. Thank you very much.